Hello and welcome to today's session. Our presenter today is Dr. Judith Torek. She comes from us. She's a visiting lecturer here at UNCP for this session. The title of this session is Active Learning Online, Maximizing Learning Agency Through Autonomy. And the objectives for this session is to understand main conceptual categories for increasing learner motivation using self-determination theory. Apply the above theoretical framework to active learning techniques in online learning environments. And we're going to discuss the suggested pedagogical and instructional design strategies, as well as utilizing the resources and support of them. So without further ado, I'm happy to present Dr. Judith Torek.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, hello, good morning, everyone. So again, thank you for having me. I would like to introduce myself first, and maybe I was hoping if you can also, or at least somebody can introduce themselves as well. So my name is Yurik Zurek. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Pratt Institute in New York City. I'm also a long-time online educator. I've been teaching for close to 20 years online. I am particularly interested in online learning strategies that create communities online, a sense of belongingness online, and active engagement online. And the reason I'm interested in those topics specifically is because I believe that students will, it will ultimately increase students' well-being and engagement in the classroom. It will increase their learning. So I usually pause here for a little bit to see if anybody else would like to introduce themselves, but or if you want to type something in the chat just to say who you are or what department you represent. I'm going to pause for just a second to see if you want to do that. So when you do, please feel free to share who you are, what department you represent, and what brought you here today. So today's agenda consists of the following. I'm going to introduce a psychological theory on self-motivation, and I'm going to make a connection from that theory to learning theory. Then I'm going to use an example of an ethics project, which is an online course project that I've been teaching for many years now, as an example to showcase how the self-determination theory is applied to the different stages and different aspects of this example. I'm going to use instructional design terminology to showcase this, and specifically spotlight autonomy, belongingness, and competence in the different stages of this ethics project. At the end, I'm going to talk about the role of e-portfolios as integrated learning spaces for this project, and additional learning implications for online teaching. So the psychological theory that sort of interested me is Ryan and Dashi's self-determination theory. So self-determination theory links personality, human motivation, and optimal human functioning together. So there, as you probably all know, and some of you may be familiar with this theory, they're both intrinsic and extrinsic motivators that are both powerful forces in shaping sort of human behavior and what we do and how we behave. The examples of extrinsic motivators are grades, for example, in learning situations, but are also evaluation, money, awards, and things like that. Intrinsic motivators sort of come from within, from within the human being, and they are also sort of internal drives that inspire us in what we do. In this article that I am referencing, which is titled Self-Determination Theory and the Facilitation of Intrinsic Motivation, Social Development, and Well-Being, the authors are looking at research that focused on sort of the social contextual conditions that either facilitate or forestall these natural processes of self-determination, and they look at different factors that have been shown to enhance self-motivation. Specifically, there are 3 psychological needs that need to be met in order for self-determination of intrinsic motivators to sort of to work. The first one is a sense of competence. The second one is autonomy. And the third one is relatedness, or also called connection. Competence is a need for people to be able to have knowledge, to have particular skills, and to be able to achieve certain things. Sense of autonomy is the human beings need to control the course of their lives, to feel that they're masters of their own destiny. And relatedness or connection is the need for people to have affectionate relationship with others. So this is the theory that motivated me. And now I'm going to show you how I translated this theory into learning theory. So competence in terms of in a learning environment is providing the learners appropriate support and challenges in order for them to feel a sense of competence, and providing plenty of practice for those learners who are perhaps not meeting the initial sort of challenges. The sense of autonomy in a learning environment is providing and giving learners choices and sort of improving their sense of voice within the learning environment. In other words, making sure that the learners have a say in what's going to happen in the learning environment, that not everything is determined and provided by the instructor alone. And relatedness, or a sense of connection in a learning environment, is basically building relationships and communities, not just with the instructor, but also within the students themselves. So now I'm going to use the example of this EPICS project that I've been teaching in an online class. This is a fully online class. This is a sort of a final project. It takes place towards the second half of the semester. It's about 3 weeks long. It's a Google campus, so we're using Google documents, docs, and slides for the project. And the main learning objective for the project is to apply the ethical theories that we've been discussing earlier in the semester with the students, and asking them to apply them to current issues in social justice. For this project, and pretty much for all other online classes that I've been teaching for several years now, I've been taking advantage in using this website, and I'd like to take a side trip to show you what I'm talking about. The Solutions U website is a space with, I think, over 10,000 stories, high quality journalism, and a searchable database called the Solutions Story Tracker. They cover a wide range of stories and people from all around the world. I think they have over 150 countries. And all of the stories that are featured on this site are featuring real struggles of real people and evidence-based solutions that they came up with for particular problems. You can search the website by topic or by success factor. So the topics are, of course, now really relevant, are going to be featured on the top, and each of these topics have many, perhaps hundreds or thousands of specific articles categorized under them. And the success factors are sort of tactics or ways that people have responded to these challenges. So empowering people would be one, cultivating collaboration would be another, using creative financing, and so on. The website is fully searchable by various ways, tags, and keywords. But another really cool feature, I think, of the site is the space for educators and for students. So many educators have been using this site for years, And some of them have created teaching collections that they shared back with the community. So teaching collections are curated by educators on how they're using these solutions-based articles. And many of them also include teaching notes and discussion questions. As an educator, you can also create your own collection, which is what I'm usually doing with my students. Students can also create their own collections. They can submit the collections as part of their assignment, or they can also share it on the website. So I just wanted to take this side note because using this particular site and these articles are a really important part of this ethics project. And I wanted you to sort of just have a sense of what it was like. Okay, so going back to the example. So this is the assignment that I'm going to use as the basis of analyzing these theories. Okay. So the instructional design theories that I'm going to feature and highlight here in order to talk about competence, autonomy, and relatedness are differentiation, group work, scaffolding, and e-portfolios. And how I relate these different pieces together is the following. The theory, which is on the left side, you see, that motivated me is to help students be self-motivated to become the kind of learners who are going to have a sense of competence and knowledge that's an intrinsic sort of part of their sort of learning, that they feel that they have a voice in what they're doing and what they're learning. And in the meanwhile, they're creating a sense of community. So that's the theory that motivated me. The instructional design structures that I translate this into is differentiation, group work, scaffolding, and portfolios. And the example of all this is the online project with its own objectives and processes. So this is how I sort of imagine these three layers work together. Okay, so the first one is differentiation. In this section, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I understand what differentiated learning is, how it works specifically in my ethics online project as an example, and why we should differentiate online. So differentiation is sometimes misunderstood, but the way I understand it is that it's really a core feature or a key feature of quality teaching, and specifically quality online teaching. It is not necessarily an individualized teaching and learning practice, but more of a student focus, not a teacher focus, but a student focus sort of way of learning. It values individual differences between students and responds to the individual needs of the student. It sometimes is used in small groups, sometimes as the whole group, but the learning objectives and the assessment remain the same, while the instruction in between, sort of the sandwich in the middle, is the difference. Is what drives the differentiation. So, according to this article, and you will have a link to it once I provide the sources, differentiation is tailoring the instruction to meet these individual needs. And there's different ways that you can differentiate. You can differentiate based on content, process, or product. If you differentiate based on content, then the type of content that you provide to different learners is going to be different based on their readiness or based on their interest or based on different triggers. So one person may read one article or one book, and the other person, based on whatever the trigger you decide, you will differentiate, will read a different book. So that's how you differentiate based on content. In terms of process, what you design instruction in a way that different learners will be doing different learning tasks in order to, for example, memorize or understand something. So one learner would be really good at flashcards, while the other learner is really good at, I don't know, writing paragraphs and contextualizing certain things. So that would be differentiated based on process. and the product is what the learner produces at the end so that you can evaluate whether they learned something. So one learner might produce a PowerPoint, maybe a narrated PowerPoint as a presentation, and the other may write a paper based on, again, whatever triggers you decide, but they will be evaluated based on the same learning objectives. So those are the different ways that you can differentiate. The trigger that basically sort of sets off the differentiation could be based on readiness, interest, or learning profile. Readiness is basically understanding of the content. So you can create a test or a quiz or any kind of problem that the students need to solve, and you can determine whether the learners are ready to move to continue with the learning process or they need additional help. And that is the trigger that basically creates the differentiation. When you differentiate based on interest, you can ask the learners what their interests are, or they can, you can create different ways to determine that. And instead of you sort of dictating what the topic is, you let the learner's interest describe that. And then that creates sort of a differentiation. And the learning profile, again, there's different ways of learning styles, different learning profiles that you can create surveys for to determine how you're going to group your learners. So, for example, this is not from the ethics class, this is just an example to show what I mean. In this example, we're going to differentiate based on content, based on the learner's readiness, and we're going to differentiate the content. So, as I said earlier, the learning objectives will always remain the same, because this is not an individualized instruction, this is not something that specific for gifted students or low-performing students. The objectives remain the same. The learning materials will also remain the same, and you will provide them at some point midway some formative assessment, because remember, we're differentiating based on readiness. So in the readiness quiz or assessment of some kind, you can perhaps divide the class into two groups, one who are the low performing and one who are the high performing. And you will assign either additional practice or samples or hands-on materials or study groups or tutoring or consultation for one group, while the other group who don't necessarily need that so much, you can provide challenge problems, more difficult, higher order thinking, or application problems. And of course, the assessment, that's the adaptive release, and the final assessment and the rubric that you evaluate your learners with remains the same. So if the learning objectives remain the same, the rubric and the assessment also remains the same. So this is one way to do it. And the reason this is so applicable for online learning, because all this, depending on what learning management tools you're using, can be automated, and it can be very easily set up for you, so that this is not additional work for the faculty. Perhaps initially, when you think about what additional practice one group may need and what's the challenge problem, and that, other than that, it sort of runs itself when it's set up properly. And yet, from the learner's perspective, they feel that their learning is individualized to their own needs. So in an online learning environment, I highly recommend differentiation, for example, in this way. In my ethics project example, I differentiate based on interest and the product, differentiating the product. So we start with the same learning objectives, and I ask them what issues they care about. I don't want to tell them what they need to research. They will decide. So the topics will differ based on the students' interests. And their research and the product that they're going to create is going to be very different. But the assessment rubric will be the same. So earlier I showed you the Solutions U website. Each student will go onto that site, and they will find on the story tracker, they're going to find a series of articles that relate to their interests. In this class, this is a 100 level sort of ethics survey class. A lot of students come from many different backgrounds. I have some nurses and some criminal justice students, some psychology, philosophy, English. They come from many different backgrounds, and I tend to find that students, say, for example, from the health care disciplines gravitate towards certain topics, while maybe a criminal justice student will go towards something else. And that's totally fine. They can find a different article, they can do their research, they will apply the ethics to those articles, and then they will produce something, but they all know that they will be all evaluated using the same rubric. So that's how differentiation works in this particular sense. So going back to the theory and to the instructional design principles that I introduced earlier, in this particular sense, I am giving learners a choice and a voice in terms of what they want to learn and how they want to show me that they learned that thing. So I am increasing their sense of autonomy, their sense of freedom in their learning. I am not necessarily dictating them everything, but they have a choice. And so I would like to pause just for a second to see if there are any questions or comments about what I said so far, and more specifically, if any of this triggered for you other ways that you have utilized online tools to foster students' sense of autonomy or freedom. So you can either unmute yourself or you can type it into the chat. I'm going to pause for a few minutes just to see if there's any comments.
We do not have any questions from the chat box.
Okay, great. All right, so I can just continue then. Thank you. The next instructional design principle that I would like to mention is group work. So in this section, I'm going to talk about what group work is and how I understand it as collaborative learning. I will show you how it works with the ethics project assignment specifically, and sort of give you my sense of why design online collaboration. So group work and collaboration is really important as an absolute necessity, I believe, as a 21st century skill in education, not just in our classrooms, but in the workplace and beyond. So if you take a look later at the NACE website, the NACE is the sort of a career competency for career readiness, a national organization for colleges and employers. And collaboration is listed as one of the key competences that all students who are in higher education must be good at for them to be employable. So individuals, working in small groups or in teams, different ways that they use online tools to contribute to the common good, to the learning. There's different ways to set up online collaborations. You can do it synchronously or asynchronously. It improves students' communication skills, interpersonal skills. It's basically beneficial for all. So I think it's just a really important skill to foster. There's a couple things that I found that are useful for setting up good online collaborations and group works. Preparation is really important from the instructor side, but also communicating those expectations to the students, to explain to the students the understanding and the value of why there's going to be a group work or collaboration, and explaining the process ahead of time, providing good guidelines throughout, and setting up a sense of community building in the beginning and throughout the project. Just throwing people into groups without any sense of trust is not perhaps the best way. So there has to be some sort of forming in the process and community building, not just in the beginning, but throughout. Assignment design is also really important. Oftentimes people complain that it's really difficult to measure or assess the learning that happens in group work. So there's sort of other authentic ways to measure what collaboration looks like. And perhaps having students contribute, that could be another way to give them voice and choice in terms of how they want to be evaluated. And just thinking about the schedule and the timing of the assignment itself, that it's not rushed, but it's also not drawn out so that people lose interest. So that there has to be some sort of rhythm to it. Technology, again, for fully online classes, very important. What are the appropriate tools and infrastructures? Some tools support collaboration more than others. we found that certain discussion boards in learning management systems are good, but they don't necessarily support the type of learning or learner preferences that all of the students have. So other ways to, and also our students, tend to be more sort of on a mobile phone. So what are some technologies that support the way they want to collaborate as well? So create those online workspaces, and then helping those students who don't have the necessary tech skills to not be forestalled by this. So to help to create videos to help them what it takes, what the online technology is needed for these collaborations. And finally, the evaluation is important, that students need to know how they will be evaluated, where are the checkpoints, who's going to be monitoring their contributions. And I also often rely on self and peer evaluations for accountability, sort of a continuous self-reflection about what have I contributed and how can I do better, and to be really, really good and helpful. So the example of my ethics project, it sort of has a rhythm of starting with an individual sense, allowing learners to form their own groups. I don't put them in their own groups. They will form the groups based on their interests. I will explain the expectations in detail. Each individual student is responsible for understanding them, asking questions, making sure that they understand how they will be evaluated. And then they start working together as a group. And then as they're working together, there are some checkpoints where each group provides each other feedback, and I provide substantial feedback to the group. I am also in constant communication with the groups and the members about their individual progress. And then once they submit the final assignment, the final submission as a group, we sort of have a celebratory sort of showcase of this. And then what comes after that is going back again to the individual submission of their reflection. So this is when they not only talk about what they learned through the process, but how they contributed and how they could sort of improve that in the future in terms of group work and collaboration. So again, starting with an individual, going to the collective and group, and then ending on an individual reflection. So another aspect of this online collaboration that comes from my ethics project is what is being shared as a view-only space and what is being shared as a collaborative space. So this is really important. I found that sometimes students get confused about what the instructions are and where I'm supposed to be contributing to. So I made a very clear distinction between two spaces. The view-only space is where you see the instructions, where you read the due dates, where you see the rubrics, where you ask for assistance from me. You're not doing anything there, you're only viewing it, and they understand that. And then I created a separate space that's for collaboration. So that's where we have a collaborative Google document where they add their research and their feedback to each other and commenting and peer editing, and where they post their presentations. So this was really useful for them to understand where to do things, especially in an online environment. It can get confusing. So this is something I found very useful. Okay, so going back to my sort of theory mapping project here again, the fact that students are working together in this and they're relying on each other, and there's several different sort of online community building activities that are part of this, I am sort of supporting their sense of relatedness, which is part of the self-determination theory. I found that oftentimes students end up just calling each other on the phone to plan their project without me even prompting. And even before the pandemic, they used to even get together. It was a fully online class even then, but they would get together on campus, just to talk as a group. So I felt like this project, because it's long enough, it's a 3.5 week long project, that they really bonded with each other as a group, and it created a sense of community and relationship. So again, I'm going to pause just for a moment to see if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to share other ways that you have tried to build successfully online relationships in your classes? Or
yeah, I have a question.
Hi.
So the 3.5-week project, my question is, how do you balance between the group work and group projects and then your more individualized projects and keep the pace that you need in order to complete the course?
So I have them complete individual projects up until that point. So this project comes towards the end of the last third of the semester. So individual discussion board assignments, individual papers, and individual projects come from day one of the semester until about 2/3 of the semester. So I already have a sense of their, they already have several grades at that point. I know what they're capable of. And so by the time the group project comes, once the group project begins, there's no more individual projects other than the final project at the end of the semester. So this is sort of a way to break away from the individual and go into group. And once they are in groups, that's the only thing that they are doing for the next 3 weeks.
Okay,
I don't know if that answered the question. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I'm going to continue. So the next instructional design strategy that I find that sort of maps onto this theory is scaffolding. So in this section, I'm going to talk about what is chunking and scaffolding, how it works with the ethics example assignment, and why we should design and facilitate scaffolded assignments in an online environment. So scaffolding is an instructional design technique that is helping learners move from sort of a lower cognitive complexity towards a greater cognitive complexity, from lesser independence to greater independence, and sort of lesser understanding to more understanding. So it increases in terms of knowledge, it increases in terms of cognitive complexity, and also in terms of independence or interdependence on the instructor, on each other. So this is an example of how it works with the project, and then I'll tell you why this is important. So this project, as I said, it takes about 3.5 weeks. It has 4 parts. Part 1 is when we are forming the groups and creating, the differentiating basically based on our interests. So we're sharing what issues do we care about. We go onto the solutions website, we read these articles, we select them, we share them with each other. That's part 1. And then there's sort of a checkpoint after that. And then part 2 begins. In part 2, the groups begin using sort of the information from part 1, the stories that they collected, the topics that they discussed, and begin to apply the moral theory, which earlier in the semester we've already sort of covered and learned about different ethical theories. But now they have to begin applying that to these articles and the topics. And once that part is finished, there's sort of a checkpoint. In part 3, the groups are beginning to put together presentations, and we're calling them social media presentations. Doesn't matter what it's called. They are sort of combining the materials from part 1 and part 2, and they're creating the presentations, and then we'll have the showcase. And part 4 is when they are sort of synthesizing what they learned, and they're writing a reflection on the entire project and the process. Again, as I said, at the end of each point, there's a checkpoint. There's sort of a grade after each, or like a mini grade. But what's interesting about this is that the way it's scaffolded mimics increased cognitive complexity based on Bloom's taxonomy. So if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it lists a set of sort of cognitive skills through which the students should be moving through. And as you see, sharing is a kind of activity, and selecting and sharing is a kind of activity that belongs to sort of a lower cognitive complexity. On the Bloom's taxonomy, it's called understanding. once we begin to apply the moral theory to these articles that they found, that's one up higher, that's applying, and then sort of analyzing what they see, using part 1 and part 2, and seeing what patterns emerge is yet another higher level. It's analyzing. And in the final part, the students are writing up their reflections and synthesizing and pulling all this together into sort of a coherent narrative about what they learned. That's evaluating. So as you see, the scaffolding itself is moving students through from an easier sort of task towards a more complex and difficult task. So how it maps down onto my theory again, in this particular sense, what I'm doing is I'm helping and providing learners appropriate support and challenges and practice. So the group work, working with other students, is not only helping them move through these different cognitive complexities, but it also provides additional examples for them. So if a student is unsure what I mean by applying a moral theory, they can always look at somebody else's as an example. So there's plenty of examples. There's plenty of places to sort of go back and circle back and provide, ask a lot of questions, not just of each other, but of me. So what happens is that as a group together, students move through this sort of learning process, and they increase their sense of ability and skill of being able to do this. So in the beginning, some students might feel like, yeah, I can do this, this is very easy. And those students will drive and help those who are less confident in themselves or less skillful in this. So that's how I feel that it maps onto the self-determination theory. Just a moment for another quick pause here for any questions or comments.
Yeah, one quick one.
Yes, go ahead.
In the last section, you were also talking about building students' technical skills. Let's say that they don't know how to do a narrated PowerPoint, or they're not familiar with using the discussion boards. How do you build in that practice with your students so that they can access and fully participate in the class without slowing, the whole process down?
Mm-hmm. So the way I run the first 2/3 of the class, so as I said, the first 2/3 of the class is all individual projects. So we do a lot of like, here's this theory, learn this, discuss this, produce this individually, and then here's another theory and do that individually, and here's another theory. So it's a cycle of, I think we go through 5 or 6 or 7 different ethical theories in these sort of cycles. And what I do is in the very beginning of the semester, I introduce to them the same tools that they will be ultimately using for the group project. But I don't tell them that. I don't say, well, learn these tools because it's coming up later. But I sort of build it into the course from early on so that by the time we reach the group project, working with the discussion, working with the narrative presentation, they've already practiced it in earlier assignments. And so by the time we get there, all students are pretty much familiar with the tools. Another thing that I do is when I ask them to create their final product as a group, I am very open in terms of how they want to present it. I give them a couple of choices. These are the tools that we've used in this class before, so you can go ahead and just use those. But if you want to try something new, and then I list a couple of different, picture charts and other sort of online presentation tools that can be more creative. Over the years, I found that not many student groups take me up on that. At that point, they don't really want to learn a new tool, so they just stick to the one they already know. But occasionally, there are some brave ones who venture into trying something totally new as a group, and they produce something in a, with a different technology. But most of the time, they're already familiar with the tools by the time they reach the group work. Yeah.
All right. So I was thinking about like students who do come with the different levels of knowledge. So let's say just, for example, the narrated PowerPoint. So would you, I know that you said you guys would practice with it during your earlier cycles, but would you require each student to go through some kind of tutorial or to attend a session where you introduced it, although some of them might be familiar with it? I'm looking at how to also differentiate the learning of the tools is what it is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I don't require them to do it, but I provide a lot of tutorials in my but the way I have the online class set up is I have like a getting started folder, and in it I have my syllabus, I have the calendar, I have my introduction and all that. But then under that I have several folders or sections where I introduce them the tools. And I expect the students to go through that. It's not required, but I expect them to do it because it is going to be required in order to submit an upcoming assignment. And usually in the first time when the assignment is due, a lot of students would reach out to say, I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, well, step one, there's a lot of materials that you can review. Did you do it? And sometimes they say no. And then once they do it, they submit the assignment. And then even after they go through it, perhaps they are maybe late with the first or the second assignment, and I reach out to say, well, what's happening? They're like, well, I don't know how to do it. Like, did you see the materials that I posted? Yes, I did. I still can do it. And that's when I set up an individual consultation or an office hour with them where I walk them through. It's usually something very small that they just missed.
Yeah.
They didn't read carefully or something, but that usually catches that. So lots of materials ahead of time, and build it in early enough in the semester that they start panicking when they can't do it. Like first assignment, oh my God, I can't do it. And then, they're like, well, did you see it? No. Okay. So
okay. That's kind of what I was getting at, because I do something similar and they don't pay attention to it and they get to the assignment and they can't do it. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I tend to find that by week 2, those who are not capable of doing it, even after they claim that they've seen the instructions, like a quick office hour meeting on, whatever system you're using, a phone call or a Zoom or a WebEx, and then that will take care of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm currently doing. I was just seeing if there was another solution.
Yeah, and another thing that has worked pretty well is I create a sort of Q&A discussion, I'm sure you all do, in the discussion board, and then students help each other. So somebody would say, I can't seem to figure this out, and then somebody else, in fact, this semester I have a student who's just so good at, just so generous. Like one of their classmates would ask a question that's like technology related, and this other student would like post screenshots and like step-by-step instructions to help them achieve that, whatever task they're trying to do. So even before I get to answer it, they help each other. So that's another cool thing. That doesn't happen every semester, but this time I have a very, very helpful student in that regard. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So if not, I'm going to move on. The next and last sort of portion of this sort of theory that I'd like to promote a little bit and talk about how I'm using for the class is ePortfolio. So portfolio, especially when it's used in an integrative sense and using a lot of reflection, it's a really, I believe that it's a really good way for learners to show what they learned and what they do. It is considered by ASCNU as a high impact practice. And I do believe that a good, well-designed ePortfolio project can provide the learners the ability to connect their learning to their previous knowledge, to other things they know from outside the class, from other courses they've taken, and sort of look forward and think about their goals, where they're headed, and how this fits in with everything they're trying to do, with their academic goals, their life goals, their everything else. So I've been using portfolios for many years. And in this particular class, I also have, of course, the students built ethics sites, what I call them. And because it's a Google-based institution, we're using Google Sites, which are fairly easy to build, and students get a hang of it pretty early on. I provide a basic template, like a suggested template, but it's not a template as in they download it. I just say, I think you should have these pages because these are the assignments that I will expect you to have on this portfolio. And they build it. They create it any which way they want. Some of them it's a drop down, some of them it's separate pages. It doesn't matter. Google Sites is pretty open that way. And I also make sure that the students are fully owning these spaces. That's one of the most important part of portfolio work, is that when you're teaching in a learning management system, the instructor owns that space. When the class is finished, the students no longer have access to that learning space. But a portfolio is a student-owned learning space, which means when the class is finished, the students can take that page or that website or portfolio or whatever they build, and they can take it with them. They can, if it's really good, they can link to their resumes, they can show it to grad school admissions, they can do all kinds of things with it. So I make sure that they own the site, that I don't own it. And then I ask students in the first page, in the home page, to do a quick introduction and sort of a personal connection as to why you're taking this class. What do you understand by ethics? How does it relate to your life? So that tends to be very individualized. They post a lot of pictures, and it's very nice. Then other pages, I have them post weekly reflections on their learning. So for every topic that we cover, I give them about 5 or 6 different prompts. They have to talk about what they learned, what they found most interesting, how it relates to their lives. And in addition to that, they're also showcasing their group work, this big project that I've been talking about, and their final project. Additionally, students also, they usually decorate the portfolios with personal images and slogans and pictures, which is very good because they personalize it. And another really important part of portfolio work is that people should be looking at each other's portfolios, because if you're just building a website to yourself, that's not very motivating. So I make sure that each portfolio is in a folder which is shared with the rest of the class. So students are looking at each other's portfolios. I prompt them to provide frequent feedback to each other. We have a portfolio showcase towards the end, but even throughout, as they're building it, I'm encouraging commenting and feedback throughout. And I added sort of a 5% grade of the final grade is the portfolio, but it's basically for completion only. So as long as you have the portfolio completed with all the necessary pieces on it, you will get that grade. But that's an extrinsic motivation, I'm sorry to say, but it definitely helps in having the students work on it and put the effort in. So that's how I use the ethics portfolios in this class. And the way I see relating to the theory is that it really brings these pieces together, that it connects students showcasing what they know. It is a student-owned space. They can do however they want to build it. So it provides them a choice and a voice in showcasing that learning. And because it is shared with the class and there's constant feedback and viewing and commenting, it also builds a community. So I think portfolio it is an integrative way to bring all this together. So the lessons that I learned from doing this project is that it is definitely inspired by Universal Design for Learning, which is really about designing for different differences in for student abilities and activities and access. That the learning objective, the activity has to be rooted in the learning objectives very strongly. And I believe that it should be over-prompted rather than under-prompted, especially in online classes where it's really difficult for students to read something and understand it once. It's important to deliver that message several different ways. Sometimes I record it, sometimes I provide it as a PowerPoint, sometimes I write it down as a paragraph and bullet points. So different means of accessing the instructions over and over so that they don't miss it. Clarifying those instructions over and over because they tend to miss that. I practice what I preach. So when I ask for feedback, from the students. I tend to give plenty of feedback myself. I emphasize the diversity of learners in the classroom, that there's a difference in how you tailor your instruction accordingly and the learning materials accordingly. And there's definitely an importance in continuous feedback in this, not just in the ethics project, as you saw after each step, after each scaffolding process, through the portfolios, and even prior to during the course, there's a lot of feedback and iteration. So those are my sort of takeaways. And when thinking about how I sort of built this, I had this learning theory, or this guiding theory, this theory from psychology that I felt was really relevant for learning. And I thought about how that translated into instructional design strategies and what kind of choices I made to emphasize those principles. And so these are questions you might want to ask yourself, is right? Like, do you have a guiding theory, something that you believe in that is important to your teaching? What is the one principle or the one key idea or concept that you believe is important for you? And if you have that, it doesn't have to be a theory or whatever, it could just be a principle or an idea. Then you think about, how do you make choices, instructional choices, to support that particular theory? And then how are you going to engage your students? What do you expect from them? And then what actually happens? Because that also, I mean, this is an iterative process. So I've been teaching this course and changing this assignment literally every semester for many, many years now. So I look at how something worked and then make a change based on what actually happened. And then another important piece is, at which point would you share this particular assignment with your colleagues for a discussion or a critique? Or how would you involve somebody as a collaborator? I think that's also really important, because teaching, especially online, tends to be a very sort of individual and lonely process. But once you have sort of a good assignment, I think it's really important to share with the colleagues and see whether you're going the right direction. Maybe they're doing something similar. Maybe you can learn something from them, or they can point out something that they're doing that you can learn, and then you can iterate and put it in the next version of your assignment. So those would be my sort of recommendations for someone following the same procedure. And again, these are other techniques that some of them I've used in other classes or in other projects that I've led, that you can maybe choose from, right? Like, maybe you're inspired by game-based learning strategies. Maybe that's the one that really sort of inspires you, or flipped learning, inquiry-based learning, digital storytelling, virtual reality, experiential, situated, embodied practices. There's all kinds of different theories and ideas and concepts that could be really inspiring to you. And then taking that sort of principle and seeing how your instructional strategies map onto that, I guess is the strategy that I'm promoting here. So yeah, so that's my presentation. I believe that active learning online needs to promote a sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I believe that instructional course design has to map onto these principles in ways that promote that process, and it has to be iterative, that it changes and moves and gets better over time. So that's the presentation. This is my contact information, and we can pause again just for a few more questions or comments or suggestions, actually, if you have any. So feel free to reach out if you have any more questions, or if you want to provide me feedback or give me comments or want to connect in any way. I look forward to hearing from you.
I want to take a minute to thank you for Professor Torok for your time today. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.